You saved for months, maybe longer. You walked into that showroom and the salesman put on a record, and the sound didn't come from the speakers. It came from everywhere. It filled the room like weather. You stood there not moving, not breathing, and you knew right then that you were going to own a pair no matter what it cost, even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches until April. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you are watching from. They were called the Bose 901. 9 speakers in each cabinet, 8 of them aimed backward and firing sound into the wall behind them, so it bounced around the room the way music bounces around a concert hall. Only one speaker faced you. It was the opposite of everything else on the market, and it worked. It worked so well that for almost 50 years, from 1968 to 2016, the Bose 901 was one of the most recognized speakers in America. Every audiophile had an opinion about them, and you just loved the way they sounded. You remember bringing them home. You remember the weight of the boxes. You remember clearing the shelf, setting up the stands, those tulip stands that looked like something from a furniture catalog, and running the speaker wire along the baseboard so your wife would not trip on it. You remember hooking up the equalizer because the 901 required one, a separate box that sat between your amp and the speakers, with a row of sliders that you adjusted until the room sounded exactly the way you wanted it to. That was part of it. You were not just buying speakers, you were tuning your living room into a concert hall, and only you knew how to get it right. And then you put on a record. Maybe it was Dark Side of the Moon, maybe it was Steely Dan or the Eagles or Fleetwood Mac, whatever it was. The moment the needle dropped and the sound wrapped around you, behind you, above you, from corners of the room where nothing was plugged in, you sat down in your chair, closed your eyes, and for 10 minutes, nothing else existed. Not the mortgage, not the job, not the lawn that needed mowing, just music, filling the room the way it fills a theater, and you sitting in the middle of it, exactly where you were supposed to be. That's what the 901 gave you, not sound, escape. And it wasn't just the big moments, the parties, the friends coming over, the Saturday nights. It was the Tuesday nights, 11 o'clock. The house was quiet, the kids were asleep, your wife had gone to bed, and you poured yourself something, dimmed the lights, put on a record you'd heard 100 times, and sat in your chair, just you and the 901s. The music came from everywhere and nowhere. The saxophone was behind your left shoulder. The drums were in the ceiling. The vocal floated right in front of you, close enough to touch. You weren't in your living room anymore. You were inside the song. Every man who owned a pair had that ritual, the late night listen, the private hour when the speakers weren't for showing off, they were for you, for unwinding, for remembering who you were before the responsibilities stacked up. The 901 was the only thing in the house that asked nothing of you except to sit down and listen. The man who built them understood that better than anyone. His name was Amar Bose. His story starts in the most unlikely place a speaker company could begin, in a 13-year-old boy's basement during a war. Amar's father was a political refugee from India who fled Calcutta and came to Philadelphia. His mother was an American school teacher. When Pearl Harbor hit, the anti-Asian sentiment destroyed his father's import business overnight. The family needed money, so Amar, at 13, started repairing radios in the basement to help pay the bills, not as a hobby, as a necessity. A teenage boy with a soldering iron keeping his family afloat. He was brilliant. He earned a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a doctorate, all in electrical engineering from MIT. Then, he stayed on as a professor for 45 years. Most people who build companies leave the university. Amar Bose never did. He taught at MIT from 1956 until 2001, running a billion-dollar corporation and grading papers at the same time. But here's the moment that started everything. In 1956, the young Dr. Bose bought himself a high-end stereo. The specs said it should sound perfect. It sounded terrible. His ears said one thing, the measurement said another. That gap between what instruments measured and what a human being actually heard sent him into years of research on psychoacoustics, the science of how we perceive sound. What he found was simple and beautiful. In a live concert hall, about 80% of the sound that reaches your ears is indirect. It bounces off walls, ceiling, floor. That is what makes live music feel alive. But every speaker on the market fired sound straight at you like a flashlight. Direct, flat, dead. Amar decided to build a speaker that did what a concert hall does. 8 drivers aimed backward, 1 forward, the 901, and he almost could not afford to build it. When he needed funding, one of his investors was his own thesis advisor at MIT, Professor Y.W. Lee. Professor Lee believed in his student so completely that he put in his entire life savings, everything he had. A professor betting his retirement on a student's dream. That is not an investment, that is faith. And it paid off for both of them. You knew none of this when you bought your pair. You didn't know about Amar or Professor Lee or psychoacoustics. You just knew that when you turned them on, your apartment became a different place. Your buddies came over and you watched their faces. Stand right here, you said. Close your eyes. And when they opened them, they all said the same thing. Where is that coming from? That was your moment. You built that. You saved for it, you set it up, you got the equalization right, and now your living room sounded better than anyone else's on the street. If you went to college in the 70s, you were probably the guy down the hall with the 901s propped on cinder blocks. You cranked the Yamaha, and suddenly your 12 by 12 dorm room sounded like a concert venue. People wandered in from the hallway. The RA told you to turn it down. You didn't. Nobody wanted you to. One man wrote that his 901s powered every party in his college basement. Concrete walls, concrete ceiling, concrete floor, and the sound bouncing off all of it was, in his words, mind-blowing. Not everyone could afford the 901. Plenty of you had the 301 or the 601, smaller, more affordable, still unmistakably Bose. The bookshelf speakers you paired with whatever receiver you could swing from the Sears catalog. Your first real system. The one that made your first apartment feel like a home when you were 23 and owned nothing else worth a damn. One man wrote that he sold his 301s decades ago and has never forgiven himself. Another said he still has his 901s from 1980, paired them with a Yamaha receiver, and calls them listening bliss. 44 years later, still going. And then there was the argument, because for every man who loved the 901, there was an audiophile who hated it. No highs, no lows, must be Bose. You've heard that line. It's probably the most famous insult in the history of audio. The purists said the 901 was a parlor trick. All ambiance, no accuracy. They said it colored the sound, the bass was boomy, the highs were missing. You were paying for marketing. You didn't care. You weren't listening to test tones. You were listening to Abbey Road, and it sounded incredible. But Amar Bose cared. In 1970, Consumer Reports published a review that said the 901's sound tended to wander about the room. Bose considered it defamatory. In 1981, he sued, and he didn't settle. He fought for 14 years. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. CBS, NBC, the New York Times, and Newsweek all filed legal briefs against Bose, fearing the case could undermine press freedom. A speaker company versus the First Amendment. In 1984, Bose lost 6-3. He came back and built a bigger company anyway. The Wave Radio, the lifestyle systems, the noise-canceling headphones that turned every red-eye flight into silence, the car audio that started in a 1982 Cadillac Seville. It was the first factory-installed premium system. Before that, car speakers were tinny afterthoughts. Bose changed that overnight. Suddenly, the drive home sounded like the living room, but the 901 was always the heart of it. And in 2016, after 48 years of continuous production, Bose quietly discontinued it. No announcement, no farewell, it just vanished from the catalog. The speaker that defined how a generation of men listened to music was gone. Then the stores closed. In January 2020, every single Bose retail location in the world shut down. The showrooms where you once stood with your hands behind your back, switching between systems, calculating what you could afford, all gone. If you ever walked into a Bose store, you remember what it felt like. It wasn't like any other electronics shop. It was quiet, carpeted. The speakers were displayed like sculpture. The salesman didn't rush you. He handed you a remote and stepped back and let you stand there, eyes closed, switching between sources, hearing the difference. Your wife was at the food court. You didn't care. You were somewhere else entirely. There were over 100 Bose stores at their peak, and every one of them was a sanctuary for men who took sound seriously. But it wasn't just the Bose. It was the whole world of stereo shopping that vanished. You remember the hi-fi dealers, the little shop on the strip mall with the listening room in the back, the heavy door that closed behind you and shut out the world, and the rows of receivers and turntables and speakers stacked floor to ceiling. You would spend an entire Saturday afternoon in there, a B testing speakers, asking the owner what he would buy with your budget, walking out 3 hours later with nothing because you needed to think about it, then coming back the next Saturday, and the one after that, until finally, one day, you pulled the trigger. That whole ritual is gone now. People buy speakers online based on Amazon reviews. They'll never know what it felt like to hear the difference with your own ears in a room built for listening. And in 2013, Amar Bose himself was gone. He died at 83. Before he passed, he donated the majority of his company's shares to MIT, the school that gave him everything. MIT can never sell those shares. They receive a dividend every year funding the research Amar spent his life believing in. The boy who fixed radios to feed his family gave a billion-dollar company back to the place that taught him to dream. Bose still exists. They still make headphones and soundbars and earbuds, and they recently acquired Macintosh and Sonos Faber. The company is alive. But the 901 is not. And neither is what it stood for, the era when your stereo was the centerpiece of your home. When you saved for months, positioned the speakers with surgical care, ran the wire along the baseboard, dialed in the equalizer, and invited your friends over on a Saturday night specifically to hear what you'd built. When the living room was not background noise from a phone, it was a listening room. And the 901 was its altar. Maybe yours are gone now. Maybe the foam surrounds rotted and you never got them reconed. Maybe they went in a garage sale you still regret. Or maybe, just maybe, they are still on those tulip stands in the basement, dusty and quiet, waiting for someone to hook them up one more time. You remember the sound? You remember the night you first turned them on and the room changed around you. You sat in your chair, closed your eyes, and for a few minutes, the world was exactly the size of your living room, and it sounded perfect. No algorithm chose the next song. No earbud fell out of your ear on the treadmill. You put a record on, you sat down, and you listened, really listened, the way nobody listens to anything anymore. The 901 demanded that, and you were happy to give it. If you ever owned a pair, tell us, what was the first record you played through them?